Hello, Dr. Sam Stein.
Hello.
Hello. Nice to meet you. I suppose, first of all, I should say I've invited Sam on to have a chat today, following what turned out to be an interesting conversation on Twitter. Initially, I rather tongue-in-cheek had posted about an upcoming TV series here on UK TV, which previously had interesting, shall we say, production practices, and I was sort of going, oh, not again. But actually, the conversation that follows moves on from that to really something that I'm deeply interested in, and that is the relationship between the media, archaeologists, and the public. And I'm hoping that Sam can help us today a little bit in understanding some of this relationship. But before we do that, can you just introduce yourself, who you are, what you do? Why are you here?
That's a existential question, I think, above all things. So I'm an assistant producer. I'm the assistant producer on BBC Two's Digging for Britain right now, although we've just finished today. The last deadline for it is this week, which will go out on the 1st of January. I'm not sure if this is going to be released before that or not, but yes, everybody watch on the 1st of January. But primarily, I am an archaeologist. I started as an archaeologist. I have a PhD from the University of Sheffield in geoarchaeology. Worked in the commercial sector for a while, worked for Historic England for a while, and then just reached a point looking at how stories are told and how stories don't get out there. And also was just really interested in sort of what goes on behind the camera. So I started doing sort of freelance work in TV. Did a few odd jobs, but I'm sure we can get into all of that. And now have worked my way into sort of being inner circle at the mysterious Digging for Britain as a theme.
Well, before we do that, I'm curious. Bird nerd. I'm looking at your Twitter. What makes you a bird nerd?
I'm obsessed with birds. It's a sort of side thing. I've always had parrots, and they're just so incredibly clever. I was a falconer for a while. They're just so smart. They have so much about them, and they smell really good, which sounds weird. But if anybody keeps birds, they know birds just smell amazing, which is such a weird thing to say, and I'm regretting it now.
So you were a falconer for a while.
Yes.
Wow, that's really cool.
Really into birds of prey, because they are really they're different completely from parrots. Parrots are really sort of social animals, whereas birds of prey aren't. And you know that it's not a love, it's a respect and a trust. It's not. There's no love there. No. But it's you also have to get really bloody, so it's fun.
You have to develop thick skin. So okay, one more question on that note. So this is not the topic of the interview, but I'm curious. What do you make of all of those TikTok videos then, where you have the parrots sort of going, "I love you," Mwah! That kind of thing? Do you think they're is it literally parroting, or do you think actually a bond can develop where they're expressing affection using words that they've heard?
It's a good question. And it is bird to bird, but having had a parrot that can associate words with different emotions and different actions, it is a genuine expression. There is an element of parroting where they hear something happen, but there's something in their brain that there's an association rather than a mimic. So they do actually feel what you're feeling. They're very, very clever.
So they kind of sort of a context appropriate response. That's really cool.
No, they don't mimic. My parrot didn't mimic. He would answer. It would be 1 or 2 levels beyond mimic. So.
That's lovely. That's it. Thank you for answering that question. I've always been curious. Okay. First of all, long ago in the 1950s, and moving on from there, UK television has had a certain relationship with history and archaeology that has often been sort of mediated, I think, by a presenter. You've had this sort of the often, so for example, a classic early one would be Animal, Vegetable, Mineral, where sage individuals were bringing in objects from museums, often their own university collections, to talk about them on a TV panel or something like that. And that sort of format changed over time. We ended up with shows like Chronicle, that first broadcast in 1966, and I didn't realize this, but the final broadcast was 1991, where he had a focus on archaeology that was commissioned by people like David Attenborough, and featured people like Magnus Magnuson. So again, people related public knowledge in archaeology and history to particular individuals, often men, often old men, often old white men. And then, of course, along comes Time Team, which first broadcast, I didn't realise this either, in 1994. I was a bit too young to notice, I have to say. And then went off the air in 2014 and came back again in an online format in 2022. So the reason why I'm just laying that out is just that all of this relationship exists, I suppose, in a context of the audience clearly likes and wants to learn about history and archaeology, and the way in which production companies feed that desire has evolved over time. But I suppose, how would you describe that relationship in your experience between archaeology as professionals and professionals who are interested in storytelling with possibly obsessive accuracy, and television production companies, directors, writers, commissioning editors, even the gaffer, and their professional desire to tell a story in a way which is accessible?
How would I describe that? It feels very much like three different parties a lot of the time, which is one of the reasons I am where I am, where, as you've described, sort of a party who really wants to tell it with accuracy, a party who wants to just tell the story, and a party who is sort of on the commercial side and making a TV program, a TV production company commissioned, and that's their bread and butter. It is an interesting relationship where everybody needs each other to exist in a way. I mean, I suppose archaeology doesn't necessarily need TV to exist, but I think it does, because why are we digging if we're not telling a story? We put out reports, we put out grey literature reports, we just turn them out and churn them out. And some of them have gems in them. And so how else are you going to get them out there? Some people have time to write a book, but actually by getting it out to a much bigger audience is through TV. So relationship wise, I think it's not very clear what it is. People don't know who's emailing who when, and about what, and is this an actual proper production? Because as we've touched on Twitter, it is independent production companies. So who is this? They're saying they're from the BBC, but they're not from the BBC. No. So I think that all gets really, really mixed up, and part of the reason I wanted to do an interview is to sort of clear up some of those blurred lines that people aren't really clear about in those relationships. So how would I describe it now? Still confused, and I'm not sure if that ever goes away as the industry grows, as both industries grow. But yeah, that's where we are.
Would you say that a good way to approach it is to, unlike I did the other day, because I was possibly in a slightly bad mood in the morning, is to presume actually that everyone involved does want a good end point, a good, as it were, product at the end? Because, for example, I have written some notes here so I didn't get too lost. But for example, I've often heard, horror stories from academics in particular, readers, professional in their field, all that kind of thing, sage individuals who are genuinely passionate. They do have a way of communicating which is actually quite effective, but then they find themselves chopped up to meet a narrative that's secondary as far as they're concerned to the nuggets the gems, as you say, that they were trying to present. Is it best to not presume that you're going to get chopped up, or is there? I mean, we'll come back to how you get involved in production in a bit and how you actually approach it, but is it a good idea not to be cynical, I suppose, about what the production company needs and wants, or are people right to be cautious?
I think people are right to be cautious.
Right.
And
also, so bearing in mind, we're not necessarily talking about digging for Britain here, just in
no, in general, because I myself have had a bad experience as a professional archaeologist. which is again something that makes me always right off the bat say, I think you should know I am an archaeologist and I understand your concerns with this, and I am going to be there throughout and listen to you and try to make sure that the best story that you want to come out of this does come out of it in a way that works for everyone, which I think it works. And I think a lot of archaeologists that I've worked with have said they feel more comfortable after that. But I myself have had bad experiences where it's not just been chopped up, but I had a production company email me over a script and said, is this accurate? And I was sort of going, no, it's not. And they their sources were just awful, and they started sending me more, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not your fact checker. If you want me as a fact checker, here's my weekly rate. But they were just, they do take up a lot of time sometimes, and part of the reason I think, and I hope I make people feel more comfortable, is that you can spend hours on the phone with people from TV because they just don't understand the story necessarily. And that's not their job to understand the story. It's our job to tell it. But at the same time, you do want somebody that can distill that information in a time that's not 5 hours of your day trying to explain it to them. And this is just from my personal experience on another production, which is why I do understand the reservations of people.
So in that sense, but again, I guess what we're touching on there is maybe the need to have that meeting of professionals. So if your time is being requested, then give it professionally and say, well, actually, this is my weekly rate, maybe beyond a couple of initial inquiries, but also as well.
And I think with a good production team, and I've worked with many good production teams, they say, actually, we're taking up a lot of your time. Can we give you a research rate? Which, isn't a lot because our budgets are small. Our budgets are so small, and it can't be maybe what a university is charging, because universities charge thousands for a day for a lecturer, which isn't to anyone's benefit.
They certainly don't pay thousands a day for lecturers, by the way.
No, I know. They just charge it. It's bizarre. And then everyone's like, I'm sorry, my rate is this, but I'm just getting my salary. It's so there's facing that on the production side as well, as you don't really want to get up into the official channels, because then you can't use that person. You just can't. You just say, I'm sorry, we cannot afford you. You are more than our presenter. I've been quoted many rates that are much more, and then told, well, you're getting paid more than that. I'm not. I'm really, really not. So yeah, it's but yes.
Well, so therefore, is there possibly a disconnect when it comes to initial things like budgeting and planning? So when people are actually coming up with a project design for their I mean, so for example, I've been approached in the past about someone, a production company, shan't name them obviously, said, well, we want to make a program about witches. What do you know about witches? And I said, well, there's some interesting bits and bobs. And they said, what about Roman witches? I was like, where do you want okay, Roman witches, well, this is some interesting bits and bobs. And they go, okay, now can we have some human sacrifice in there? And I'm like, well, you can, but but and there's this sort of sense of like they knew what the end point was for them, and they were trying to get threads to get you there, kind of thing. And what was interesting was that I didn't even think to ask, am I being paid for my time? And it ended up leaving it can leave a bitter taste in your mouth when they then just stop, because as far as they're concerned, possibly either they can't afford you, they haven't got the budget for it, or maybe they don't like exactly what it is that you're saying. And I guess the problem is, though, you don't always know, do you? So it can be easy to sort of come away from that and just sort of think, oh, well, clearly they just didn't like what I was saying. When actually, as you say, there's no budget for it, possibly.
It could be any of those things. It could also be as innocent as a researcher that called you, it was their last week and they forgot to write it down. It genuinely is. It is sometimes that. It is sometimes that. So it's a very crazy, very fast-paced world where not everything is personal, and it's not that they're not paying you because they don't like you, it's because they don't have the budget. It's not that they're not but sometimes some productions are built on the premise and they're still trying to stay very close to what the commissioner said they have to do, and so they're not willing to really branch out. Others, they say, so an exec, like, look, this is not the way the story's going, it has to go this way. And if it's a good exec, they say, okay, well, we'll talk to the commissioning editor and we'll see.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, you started off talking about storytelling, and my my colleague Andy Brockman is always talking about archaeologists as storytellers, but I can't help but wonder because the reason why I laid out that sort of slight mini TV history at the beginning was this idea of history being mediated through, an expert who's in front of the camera kind of thing. But is there an issue sometimes when, if you've got that question mark of why didn't they get back to me, is there sometimes an issue of language and training, in so much as often I think archaeologists and historians are trained to talk about the past in a way which is an attempt at objectivity, as opposed to it being subjective and relatable and centering around a person possibly, or a narrative that someone can envisage being on the screen, as opposed to some sort of godlike view of society. Like, is there sometimes a disconnect in terms of how these two groups of professionals actually talk to each other?
Yeah, I think definitely. To start with your first one, why don't they get back to me? I'm going to take this opportunity to say I'm really sorry if I haven't gotten back to you. I'm really sorry. It happens. And I was like, I promised myself I would never be that producer that does that.
There's someone typing right now. I'm
so sorry. Because it does happen. It really does happen. My inbox just keeps going and going and going. And I try to answer everyone, and it can't always happen. And really, honestly, if you find me on Twitter, I'm probably more likely to be like, oh, hey, I didn't mean to not answer you. There's a lot of you. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. But the question was, why? Storytelling.
Well, I suppose, and the specific lenses that I guess lots of archaeologists are accustomed to using, I suppose, in that sense.
So when I started in TV in general, I was very entrenched in archaeology, and archaeology as not necessarily storytellers, but as having to tell what happened. Here we dug a hole, and here we found this. We think this happened, this happened, this happened. That's really interesting because this and this and this. And those stories are easy to write down. Yes, some of them are really interesting, depending on how you frame them. But I was very accustomed to that way of telling a story. I did jobs as a runner. I worked on all sorts, garden rescue, rich house, poor house, and then eventually found my way back into archaeology in TV. And learning how to tell a story was the biggest skill that I had to learn, because it's a complete unlearning and relearning when you're telling an archaeology story, where I can say, this is what's interesting about this site, and they have this dating to corroborate it. Like, okay, but what about that story is particularly going to relate to somebody sitting on the sofa after having tea with on a tray? Like, why do they care? Do they care that the radiocarbon date is really, really exciting because we've never seen we've never seen this small of an error before on a site like this? Like, no, they're not. They don't care. What they care about something else, and you just have to find out what that is, and you have to work out if you're stuck with a story. I say stuck with a story. If you start investing in a story, and you really don't want to let it go, you have to find an aspect of that story that's really going to connect with someone. And I think that's where often it sort of veers off in a direction that an archaeologist may not think is the direction they want to tell it. But in that case, you have to talk to them and sort of see, are you happy with this line being said? And at the same time, and what I love working on Digging for Britain is the team, we can all sit down together, and I could say, I had an email from this archaeologist says they're not really sure about this narrative anymore. Can we veer it off in a different direction? And sometimes it's as simple as deleting half a line of comm. They're like, done, it's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. Their ideas that they had 5 months ago, it's gone. But as long as it's fitting in the wider story of, people like, what do people like? They like wild camping here. Let's put it in the framework of wild camping. And that's the sort of storytelling that I don't think we think of in archaeology, of how does it relate to everybody else that really doesn't care a bit. But you have to make them care. and telling them that this is really exciting doesn't make them care.
Well, but
telling
also,
them something. Yeah.
But also, I suppose a slight observation on that, I would say, would be, and I often say this is a turn of phrase, but it's true. I've never got into a taxi and not had the taxi driver, when I say I'm an archaeologist, go, ooh, and then you can person to person make the most boring thing in the world really interesting if you're passionate about it. But I imagine that trying to start with, look at this little pile of pins here, let me tell you about the Merovingian Empire, doesn't translate through a TV camera, does it? So if you're in the room, maybe people have that experience, they have that intuitive sense of, I can make this interesting. But if you're trying to write around that, trying to film around that, trying to make something that's going to be viewable to someone who's got their TV dinner and they're just, or what they say, that's harsh, someone who's eating their dinner, frankly. But yeah, I was thinking of myself.
No, sorry, I was thinking of me too. Like,
yeah, exactly.
The tray with the little padded bottom and the TV. What do I want
the
to
dining
see?
tables for Christmas. Yeah. Someone who's just basically wanting to be entertained as much as informed. Then I think I understand that trap. I think I've definitely fallen into that. And I mean, one of the best examples I've ever seen of someone subverting that was last year. We were doing some filming on a project near Hull, and it was a Roman fort, relatively little known Roman fort, and the archaeologists were really interested in the meta narrative, in how actually this relates to the empire, and you can go to the Rhine from here, and you can go in York and blah blah blah.
It's that community project with the University of Hull.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I know that one.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. And it
sorry, I didn't get back to you. That's one of them.
Yeah, there's no point. We won't go down the roads of what was happening in and around behind the scenes, etc. But what was interesting was that the people in charge were sometimes they were really interested in we found a courtyard here, and they could see immediately how this courtyard related to, international glass production or something like that. And they went to use with a journalist the word palimpsest. And she said, I can't put that in my article. I can't write that. And there was a weird moment where he just gave up. He went, right, okay, fine. Well, in that case, it's a hole. Whereas he could have just taken just that little step further. Well, actually, a palimpsest is just a series of, what a palimpsest is, but people at home, a series of overlying remains, that are partially rubbed out maybe over time, and you can infer a layered story. And he didn't. But another archaeologist on the site did a really great job of actually sort of almost taking her by, almost whisked her around and said, look over here. 2,000 years ago, you would have seen a whole bunch of people walking up over that hill. Just imagine what it would have been like to be here at that point. And it became subjective. It became something more than just this sort of overarching, niche thing. So I don't mean to ramble on there, but I definitely understand the
I'm only looking down because I'm freezing. That's all.
Oh, okay. I'm freezing. Freezing cold.
Cold.
Has the snow gone yet or the ice, or is it still there?
It is. It's just trapped the cold in, I think. No, sorry. That wasn't at you rambling at all.
No, not at all. So this idea of accuracy versus story versus entertainment and this kind of thing, and keeping people's attention, is this why often we saw a sort of a shift away from your Magnussons, etc., towards, you think, something like Tony Robinson, because Tony was recognisable as a bit of literally a slightly dirty everyman in the person of Baldric, this sort of hello, but also as well he had a skill which might have annoyed some archaeologists of cutting through the jargon and just saying, okay, yeah, but tell me something human, tell me something real here. Is that one of the reasons why sometimes, the reason why I'm asking that question is that sometimes I've seen archaeologists on Twitter say, well, why not hire an archaeologist instead of hiring that person? Why is this being presented by a comedian? That kind of thing. Is that?
Yeah, it is exactly that. It's a classic. It's a classic technique of, you have to have somebody who's on everybody's level, who's going to ask the questions that they would ask on if they were there. And they're the first in archaeology to do it, but it's done a lot, where there's somebody that's an expert, and there's somebody that likes it, interested in it, but has to ask the question so that everybody understands. And there's not one on digging, because Alice is really good at asking questions. And it does take an enormous amount of skill as a presenter. I've seen a lot of them, and she just has a mind-boggling amount of skill in getting those points across. And you said, I think this is the story I want to tell, and she goes, oh yeah, okay, and she just does it. But it takes an enormous amount of skill, which is a lot simpler to do with somebody who doesn't necessarily know the subject. The questions she's asking, she knows the answers to most of them. But it doesn't seem like it. She's on the journey with you, but you need somebody on the journey with you, not necessarily to hold your hand, but to sort of just be on your level, be with you, to bring you into a world that's not yours.
And
it's not just Time Team. They do it in countless projects. Just classic thing to do.
Again, I don't want to be naming specific productions because I think this is more about the theme of stuff. But I can definitely think of a few, absolutely. But I suppose in that sense, it's a bit like a good tour guide, I guess. They're always visible. They have the little flag, and they'll help you to spot things that otherwise you might not have looked up or looked down and seen. And they have maybe in their head a bigger arch, but they're not having to tell you how we're going there and how we're getting there and where we're going to end up. You don't even notice it. You just sort of go along with them. So is that part of the element here, is that archaeologists need to be, if they want to be considered more often as being helpful in telling these stories, that they need to actually go to, possibly move a bit closer to that realm where production companies and writers and researchers are. I
wouldn't think so. I don't think so. I think there's plenty of room for experts on screen. There's plenty of room for somebody who is full nerd out. I'm going to tell you all of the details here, and you're going to like it, because that's fun too, to get somebody with their passion and really going through it. But you need a translator, you need an interpreter, all the way through, even if you have two people. And that's a format I always wanted to do, and I haven't had the chance to yet, is to have two archaeologists just talking nonsense at each other. Well, archaeological nonsense. It makes sense to us. But have somebody like, what are you on about? Oh, I see. That person went there. Got it. I just think, but it's hard to get three people on screen and have it make a lot of sense. You don't see three people very often because it is a little harder to film. But that sort of, because we are bonkers when we start talking to each other, aren't we? We must sound like a foreign language. So just to see that happen and then have somebody go, all right, you guys are mad. This is actually what happened. That would be a format I'd love to do. So I think there's plenty of room for it.
Yeah, it reminds me of those round tables you sometimes see on channels like Dave, where you've got 3 or 4 comedians just sharing stories. And I think each story is kind of, there's someone who's telling the story for that segment, and the other people are reacting to it. But it feels very unscripted and very natural. That could be really interesting. Yeah. So how best is it then to pitch new ideas? Because rather than just being approached and going, they want me to tell them the story that they want to hear, in some cases, not all cases. I find myself very aware of the fact that there'll be overarching channel policies. For example, they're wanting to include certain types of stories or certain types of places and people and events, this kind of thing. But also as well, there are other things that are definitely out of your control. For example, at the moment, BBC4 is at risk of being an online only channel. They're thinking about taking it off air and making it streaming only, which will definitely impact budgets and how that sort of stuff unfolds. What is the best way to approach that kind of pitch? And if you have an idea, I mean, who could you approach? Because some production companies just don't accept unsolicited pitches either.
Yeah, I've been through a similar thing. Wasn't sure how without being on a development team. And honestly, the reason I got the job on digging is because I randomly started writing up pitch documents that sounded interesting. and sort of putting episodes together. But this was after gaining a lot of knowledge and actually helping writing a few scripts as researcher. So I had an idea of how a script should look already. Started writing up pitch documents and sending them to various heads of development in different units, not different units, that's an archaeology word, in different companies. And Rare TV said, I like this a lot, not sure how it fits in, but you sound good for Digging for Britain. So that was how I accidentally fell into Digging for Britain, was I pitched something to their head of development. And a lot of smaller indies are looking for stuff. So there's nothing stopping you writing up a pitch document or just straight on emailing heads of development who are still thinking that people do commission 1 hour specials, because they don't. But some people might still think they are. Occasionally it does happen. There are situations where it happens. So it's not completely off the table. Equally, going in is applying for jobs as a development researcher, a development, mostly development researcher, development AP. And I really like working in development. I have one full-time gig in development, and it's just a constant, you order a book that you think might be interesting, you read half of it and you think, yeah, I can make something, and you write it up and you get the rights for the book, and that's sort of what you do. But if you have your own book, obviously you can write up your own. But one thing I would say is I think archaeologists incredibly undersell themselves. We have all of the skills that it takes to be a development researcher, as we are, because really what they want is somebody that knows how to use Photoshop, which I think a lot of archaeologists do. We know how to use tech, and they want somebody that knows how to write. That's it. That's what they're looking for. So, even if you are looking for something to do in the winter that's not going outside, and you think you want to apply for some development researcher posts, if somebody's looking to do some specialist factual stuff, I feel like that's some fresh ideas right there. I'm gonna bring them on board for a month and see how they do.
Is formatting an issue though? Because you mentioned this idea of you knew what a script looked like, and you knew presumably that would have helped not just be thrown into like a slush pile in that initial glance, as it were. So do you think learning, if not literal language, but at the very least learning how to present your idea in that forum is a good idea?
Yes, it needs to be thought out before it can be pitched. A commissioner will want to know your format before it goes out. Is it a two-presenter job where they go across the country, or is it a presenter in a studio and we do VTs around the country, or what is it? What does it look like? So that does need to be thought out, but I'd say it doesn't necessarily have to be in the first idea.
No.
If there is a good first idea, then a format can be built around it but quite easily. Where, is it the classic person sat sideways in front of books talking to the person off camera, or is it more of a come with me, I'm going on this adventure over here? Which one is it going to be? And then also, how is it set up, structured in a longer form? And also considering, are you pitching to a commercial channel? Are you pitching to the BBC? What are you pitching to an American audience where pretty much anything can go through because they'll say anything I like?
Oh God.
No, we don't.
There's a oh God, it's so annoying. There's a show called Forbidden History. Jamie Theakston is involved with it, and I once saw, I think it might have just been the trailer, but it felt like I watched a whole episode, where he's in a museum, it's dark, he's got a torch, he's looking in the glass cabinet, and behind him you can see through the window, it's daylight, and you're like, it's not, you've turned off the lights, just, sorry. Yeah, so the affectation, I guess, it might be interesting to consider.
They're really different. Americans are the biggest buyers.
Mm-hmm.
They will buy a lot of stuff. And that's because they can drag out a single tiny subject into a half an hour. You don't know how, and you don't know why you've watched it, but you just have. You've just been taken in.
Yeah.
You've watched all the ads because you thought, I need to know what happens next. And I like British TV because it doesn't do that, but Americans are big ones to pitch to. But in that sort of case,
the hook and never quite delivering until the end. Yeah.
In that case, you do have to be aware, I suppose, that the story is going to be stretched out. It is going to be melded into something that they need to know what it's going to look like. American broadcasters really want to know what the end looks like. And a lot of British ones are happier to take that risk of, I don't know what this is going to look like, but it's an intriguing idea. So they'll sort of go along that line a little more. This is not across the board. This is just...
No. But it's, I guess in that sense, what you're describing is the need to appreciate where that production company works, what market they're aiming at, what sort of format, what the function of the format is, and also that, I mean, I think American TV does it less these days, but that thing where they used to do dramatic sort of crash zooms, and you'll never guess what happens after the break, and after the break actually you don't really learn it, you learn that 2 breaks later, and that sort of thing. But that's a legitimate format. That's actually a way of making, it's not a way that maybe you thought about it being made, but being open to that relationship between the ingredients and then the presentation on the table. I can see why it's off-putting to initially, but also I guess being open to it.
But and you also, like, you don't have to pitch to just one.
No.
In development, you'll have a good story, a good idea. You'll have the rights to an idea, and you'll write it 5 times for 5 different people, because each channel will have different slots that they need to fill. So one of them will be a daytime slot, so you actually have to write it a little more daytimey. Another one will be, evening primetime slot that they're looking to bulk up, and you have to make it big.
And so would big or daytimey, would that be to do with the type of content or how quickly it's delivered, what's being featured on screen?
The tone, it's the tone, it's the content, it's the amount of drone you use half the time. Okay. It is quite different, and you have a lower budget. There's just across the board a lower budget, but you're expected to deliver a lot more because daytime will want to strip over 5 days for 6 weeks. So you have to make a lot. Again, not a hard fast rule, but
but
different.
These are things to consider. Now you mentioned that it's less and less likely to have a 1 hour special made on your special little thing that you're interested in, and here I'm going to ask a question that I'm curious about, and I'm not implying anything. I'm just curious about it. Okay. And that is when I think of 1 hour specials, I tend to think of things which are produced either in conjunction with like a big project that's happening at a historical site. So like some of the royal palaces, sometimes they'll say we're digging up the garden, and there'll be like an hour special about that. But a biggie that I couldn't help but have questions about was the coverage of things like big civil engineering projects and the relationship between, well, again, actually, considering what we've just been talking about in terms of function of production, what is the role of archaeologists in that sort of approach to what is a very non-civilian location, and that company or that development behemoth often saying we'd like you to come in and look at these shiny things that we've got, and what's the relationship between the things and the fact of the things on a site, and ethical concerns of I mean, someone I know used the phrase greenwashing in that sense, and is it difficult sometimes in terms of productions to avoid that in terms of getting access versus function of production, if that makes sense? Like, I suppose to put it another way, have you ever found a situation where it's been awkward, where you've had to sort of say, okay, we're not, or not you, other productions as well, whether or not there's actually been a moment where you've had to sort of say, well, okay, we are just going to focus on this little thing here, because asking the question as to whether or not this project is even necessary is outside the remit of our production.
100%.
Yeah.
Every time.
Right. Yeah.
I do my best to cover projects that are amazing projects, but sometimes you do have to focus on a shiny thing. In order to get it through. It's either that or nothing, and sometimes you're out of time, so you have to do that. You definitely have to focus on one single aspect of a wider project almost always. There's so many aspects of so many projects, you can't. I'm not sure if that's the answer to your question, but focusing on one thing is very much what we have to do. You have to tell a single line of a story. You have to focus on one aspect of a wider project. And if there's a million things there that are really interesting, you can say, aside from the amazing Viking, Roman and prehistoric finds, there was also a Tudor castle. Let's talk about the Tudor castle now, because they think that's what we want to do. But actually, there's a bigger story that's Viking, but you've had to focus on the Tudor castle because you've already, that. But I'm not sure what that's related to a 1 hour special.
No, well, I suppose, for example, in the case of HS2, saying we're going to let you in on HS2, you can report on this archaeology that's being done, but maybe it might be an idea not to necessarily examine the protesters who are outside the site, that kind of thing.
I see.
Or I guess to if we take it outside the purview of Britain, a little less connected to us, places like Abu Simbel, where they moved a monument in order to create a sort of a reservoir, and the relationship between the public and archaeology in the monument is still vibrant. It's still there. It's still an amazing place to visit, but there are questions there as to why did this happen in this way. Is this? I guess what maybe one of the things here is this idea of function. Presumably the function of a production isn't always to be journalistic in terms of an approach to something.
No, I don't think it is. That's not always the purpose.
No.
It is to tell a story that it needs to be told. It's a different aspect. It's a different story than what we're used to hearing, I suppose. And I'm not saying that's always the right thing to do. And I think it depends on the purpose of your production, and it depends on what you're going for. But I try incredibly hard and have been quite successful in not working on anything that I really don't agree with. I don't like, it's very uncomfortable to give that platform where it doesn't always belong. It's part of, I hope why production companies like to work with me, and also why archaeologists like to work with me, because I won't really cover something if I don't think it's being done.
No.
And so, done in a right way not necessarily from a non-archaeologist. I can't speak to if I agree with HS2 or not, but the archaeology I'm happy is very, very good,
Well, and I suppose stepping back from your experience and how you feel about your work, do you think that people who are interested in doing this sort of work need to be do you think you need to have that sort of consideration, as it were, the function and the ethics of what you're doing, or do you think that that you can do this sort of work without having that consideration? I suppose I'm just trying to feel it out.
You absolutely can. You can do this work without having those considerations. That's not a problem.
No.
If you should or want to do this work without those considerations is a different thing. It's anybody can work in TV. It's a great place because it welcomes everybody and anybody. I know it seems really hard to get into and can look like nepotism and can look cliquey, but I mean, I didn't know anyone. I was just like, I kind of want to do this. So anybody can do it. It's just, it's who's working on it and how good are they at what they're doing, and what the projects are like. I mean, it's project by project, and everybody's freelance, so they all move around all the time. So you're always getting a mix of characters, and it's just really knowing where to stand your ground and where to say, well, I can let that can let 2 treasures slide, but I don't want a treasure here. It's really coming up with a middle ground
so
for everybody.
The use of of language like treasure.
Yes, but I'm just in reference to everything. You have to find a middle ground that it works for everybody.
Okay.
And that you're happy that ethics are there, but you're also dangling that carrot of actually there is something shiny here. But we're going to talk about the context now. But look, Commissioner, we've made a shiny thing too. You do really have to dance around a couple poles there. I guess that's not a phrase, is it? But
no,
I said it anyway.
No, but and I mean, I guess to be really clear on that, I'm really fascinated by this. I guess the room in which one has to make these considerations, in so much as I think often it can look to people as though there's an easy binary, and one makes the choice as to where it is that you're gonna find something that's going to be sellable, as opposed to something which is interesting, or something which is as you say, sort of ethically sound. But it sounds as though there is room to negotiate that sort of grey space, as opposed to just going, it's either entertainment or it's accuracy. This thing we talked about right at the beginning.
There's a lot of room there, I think, and including in development. I think a lot of commissioners, I can't say that because I don't know what commissioners are thinking, but the general acceptance is that a pitch isn't necessarily always going to look exactly like a pitch.
No.
There is room to maneuver around. So it's not always the end of the world after something's been commissioned. It's just the budget has been drawn up as to what has been commissioned versus what is actually going to be made. And sometimes I think things do get lost there. But there is definitely room either in pre-production or during production, and even in post-production, you can rewrite a story entirely to make sure that it's something that's working for everybody until it goes past picture lock, and then they get really angry.
Yeah, I can imagine. Or as you say, when if someone says, "Well, actually, now we don't think that this person was murdered. In fact, they were whatever they were run over by a car." You can sort of you can maybe make those accommodations.
As long as it happens before picture lock, everybody's okay with that.
But no, they're murdered. Tough.
Yes.
Okay, well, but it's interesting because this year has been really interesting for the way that archaeologists relate to media. I found it very interesting to see most recently a certain TV series released on Netflix, a certain movie that was released earlier this year, and we've seen a lot of pushback from archaeologists in various ways, various forms, in relationship to these different types of media. Some are on the big screen, some are being streamed, some are on TV, some only get really a release on YouTube, frankly. And I mean, bearing in mind, I think probably the need for more archaeologists to really consider the difference between documentary, dramatization, and factual programming. I think there needs to be probably a bit more consideration there. What is the best point? I mean, we've talked about how to approach and what to approach with, but what's the best point in that cycle of pitching, writing, development, production, marketing, distribution, and reception? What's the best point to actually get involved in that conversation? Because cards on the table, I've come to the conclusion that there's very little point in complaining after, say, a certain movie about a certain king found in a car park has come out, because what you either do is point to the thing that you don't like, or you just make it look as though archaeologists are basically jumped up media critics who don't really understand the process. So what is the best place to get involved in these cycles? And you don't have to comment on any specifics. Please do feel free not to.
It's a good question because there's forever moving pieces and it's impossible to watch them all if you're not in the industry, or even if you're in the industry, where everyone's constantly pitching, everyone's constantly getting projects made, and they're not always people that know anything about archaeology. No. And a lot of things get made without anybody even aware of it until it's been trailed, because there are so many I mean, it is a small world and a lot of people work together, but you know, there are also cliques where people move in specific circles. And after a short freelance job, here's a secret. I did sort of have an informal chat about Ancient Apocalypse before it was made, to work on it, which was, I did not know what it was. It was, I have a friend who's making an archaeology program, and I just passed him your name in case you wanted to chat to him. So it is sometimes as much as that. It was not somebody I'd ever heard of before, and again, not somebody that I ever worked with. And he was, you know, I had a informal chat while he was in the back of a New York City taxi cab. So it was a really odd thing. And they've obviously seen that I work in archaeology, and I never heard from them again. So I think that's sort of where that died.
But you never know; they might have just lost your phone number. That's it.
So, but then from then, you know, I keep looking up his name because I can't actually find it. You know, I don't know anybody that's worked with him. I don't know anybody that's spoken to him. So I don't know where you could actually get involved with that. And honestly, probably the best place to do it would be at commissioning level of talking to what the commissioning goals are and who the editors are. But, you know, in private industry, who can you control what they put out? Let's not talk about that aspect, really, because it's all gone a bit wrong on Twitter, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So it is very much a who owns what and what are they willing to put out. And it's frightening because a lot of misinformation can spread, but it's not just archaeology that's dealing with it.
No, absolutely. But I guess that for me is just the big question mark is how can we have better, not only better conversations, but conversations that actually move the needle a little bit, because
well, yeah, I mean, the good thing I think about said program on Netflix is that there will be a desire to commission more. And maybe some of it might look a little trashy and have to push those boundaries and get that audience continuing to watch archaeology because they know that they're into it now. Maybe they're into the wrong part of archaeology. But with new commissioning and different production companies trying to jump on it, the more people that are in archaeology that are working on archaeology programs and know archaeology, the better chance we have at having people on production teams to responses to that, which is the response to that is more people are interested. Oh, okay, let's put some more money into archaeology. Because before that, you know, there was very little money for archaeology. The response was, well, you know, there's one or two and that'll do it. That's fine. It has to be really spectacular and then maybe a one-off. You're like, well, could we make it a series? Because I can't make any money on a one-off. So yeah, it's that's why I really would like to encourage people to get into it that know archaeology, because there is going to be a bigger budget in commissioning for archaeology now.
Well, and that aspect is that the answer to my question mark? And the answer is actually it's not a case of expecting development or early development stage conversations to then reach out to an archaeologist, but rather to be involved in the industry in some way and therefore be more likely to hear about these things happening and be more helpful and be present and so on and so forth. It's not, I mean, I wrote here, you shouldn't expect the mountain to come to Muhammad in that sense, but maybe that is part of it.
I mean, a certain film, yes, they probably should have reached out to people before they portrayed them on the screen. But you know, like that's that's a different case. But the response to it is people like archaeology, and the response to that is what else can we make that we can commission? Let's do. I know it sounds awful, but maybe we can do an archaeology of royalty. All right, fine, archaeology of royalty. That sounds awful, but let's do the best bloody job that we can on archaeology of royalty, and then off the back of that, maybe we'll have some new talent. We'll have some people moving up the ladder. You know, there's response to that.
So is it almost a case of thinking of what's the next project, what's the next goal, what's the next?
Well, that's what everybody's constantly thinking. It's always what can we get commissioned next? What can we get commissioned next? And can we make a series of it? Because that's what people want too, is a series. You want to have a series. You there's no money in a one-off.
No.
You might have a really intriguing story, but can you fit it in a series? Different intriguing stories, have 5 of them, and yes, there you have a series. Yeah. It's the only way that anybody's benefiting and the higher up in their pockets. So.
And so I suppose in that sense, it's a case of moving away from the idea that any production is looking for peer review or for a debrief. What they're looking at is what's next and on the horizon, what they're going to make next, and how's it going to be received, and
yeah, it's made, it's done and dusted, and that's part of why I like it. That's part of why I really like TV. Is once it's on, I suppose we can change little bits and pieces here and there, and we can rip it off, but BBC gets really upset. So actually, you put it out. It's not like archaeology where your project can actually go on for the rest of your life. You're like, oh, great. No. This is never over.
And then maybe it gets published after I'm dead. Yeah.
It'll get published, but then out of that, I'll have another paper that I need to write. Oh, no, there's 3 more. Yeah. No, it's never over in archaeology. But in TV, it's on and it's done and it's gone and it's what's next.
It's really cool that isn't a negative. That sounds like it's something that's exciting and vibrant and interesting and can be stimulating. I suppose. Like I said, I had thoughts and questions and so on and so forth. But I suppose the last thing I would invite you to feel free to say is what would you want to say to fellow archaeologists and others who are passionate about this public arena, and that maybe you think they would find helpful. I'm trying to find a way to not word that as though you need to hear this, archaeologist, but like what would you say if you could, and if it's something that I haven't even thought to cover, as it were.
I suppose I really want to say, because people do seem interested in getting into it, and I know I've had one person join us on Digging for Britain this year, and he was absolutely great. He worked as an archaeologist, didn't know how to get into it, just happened to, his CV came at me at just the right time and send it in, and just take those chances like that. But you can just get into it. Don't be afraid to do other stuff that's not archaeology and TV, because honestly, I felt like I learned so much on some really great and really, those things on E4 that you feel like you shouldn't watch but actually have to watch. But you learn a lot about stuff. And just watching all those sorts of things and working out how different stories are told in different arenas, because they are very different. How Brian Cox can tell a story, and it's very different to how Alison's going to tell a story, and how a different archaeology presenter is going to tell a story. But for people that do want to get into TV, like I said, don't be afraid to work as a runner.
Just for people at home, what is a runner? Just in case anyone doesn't know.
That's a good point. It's something I didn't realize going into TV either. There is a whole different jargon. So I thought I wanted to work in production, and that was wrong. It's like, really? Don't you want to work in editorial? So production is not the same as editorial. Production looks after the money.
Right.
So, people, assistant producers and producers are not in production, which seems counterintuitive. So you do want to work up the editorial line, unless you really like money, in which case maybe you want to work
if you love those spreadsheets, go ahead.
Line. They do hold all the power, though. Where they hold it.
Is that the answer? We need to infiltrate production.
No, do not.
There's £5 million here for.
I'm sure like some archaeological management in production would be interesting. So a lot of TV is working in dailies when you're first starting out. So doing 1 day a week as a runner, and I took holiday to do a BBC internship from an archaeology job, and it's really weird when there's people younger than you and you have a PhD and you're getting them tea, but that's what you have to you don't have to do it, but it's really helpful in seeing how things work, because it is a weird place, and I'm only really just now feeling like I'm getting to understand it versus archaeology. But you can do it, and you just apply for runner jobs and try them out, see if you like being on a set and things like that, if you haven't been on one as an archaeologist. and yeah, it's great because it's fast paced and you work on different jobs. You'll work on 5 or 6 different jobs in a year. Yeah, you don't know where your next paycheck's coming from, but is it not the same in a lot of archaeology anyway sometimes?
I was literally just about to say,
so it's kind of, you have that knowledge, which is a power, that people do want that knowledge of something because, well, quite frankly, your fact check goes faster. If you're on an archaeology program and you have an archaeologist who's a fact checker, they know where to look for sources. So, you know, it's saving people money, so they're happy with that. And also you get to say, no, that's not Roman. That's, you know, you get a little bit of say in that. And so, so yeah, I would encourage as many people to work on this side of TV as possible. I know it's really tempting and glamorous to work in front of the camera, but it's just as glamorous as us. You stay in the same hotels as us, you ride in the same cars as us. Sometimes we drive you in our disgusting cars. So you know, it's not.
Would you say then that because it sounds as though, just on that note, because you know, obviously we joke about, it's quite a dark joke, but we joke about job security and predictability and so on and so forth, and you know, work and pay in archaeology a lot. But it sounds as though career progression is just as varied and potentially non-predictable as it might be in archaeology. So, for example, the fact that you were picked up for digging for Britain based on pictures that you'd written about something else entirely, that does sound very familiar again to me, but also I imagine to lots of archaeologists who are watching and listening who might go, well, actually, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not really sure how I ended up managing this dig, but I'm here, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So do you think actually that might actually make working on that side of the camera, as you put it, a little less scary than some archaeologists might think? Because actually, we're kind of used to working in this way anyway, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as it's been worked out that I can do the job and have a specialism, I've not really been that worried. I think I've been less worried in TV, which is crazy because I've had fewer longer term contracts than ever. But it's, you know, it's you already have a skill and you already have all of the skills that you will need, and you have more skills, because I've seen some really shoddy LiDAR go into programs. I'm like, should I just do you a better one? Like, you know, you have skills there that are really, really valuable in a lot of different industries, but including in TV, and that's an area that we really need to bulk up on our ability to get our stories out there, because I suppose you have stories, and it was while I was a science advisor at HE, and I was just thinking, this is a great story and not enough people can see it. And the client sort of goes, yeah, well, thank you for your input. I'm like, that's it. And you don't get the chance to tell it. But what's the point of it if we're not telling it?
No.
And yes, we can tell it in a book, or we can tell it in grey literature, but this is the biggest audience that you're going to get. So, I mean, let's tell as many of our stories as we can, and let's tell them in the best ways possible. And if we don't like how other people are telling them for us, then go and tell them with people that have the skills to tell them in the way that they know that they need to be told. I don't know. I've just always been, oh yeah, that looks good, I'll go do that kind of person.
And as I say, I think lots of archaeologists are similar in terms of how their careers go. So that's basically it, and that's ultimately the thing that I was most interested in inviting you on to talk today was breaking down some of those perceived barriers, and the fact that actually it sounds as though the fence isn't that hard to hop, and that but you just need to want to, and to have an interest.
It's bonkers though. I sat in the lobby at BBC in Manchester, and there was like 3 students around me. I didn't know I'd be picked for this internship, and they're like, this is prestigious. Why is that? I don't know, I just applied online. I thought it looked interesting. It goes from there. Okay. You have all the skills, and you just need to, and I'll just say this going into it, this is the only reason I still have a Facebook. All the jobs are on Facebook. if you really want to do one, there's, you can pick up a daily job, you can pick up a weekly job. If, there's regional groups for doing runner jobs, there's national groups for science communication jobs. There's tons and tons of Facebook groups. And that's where they all are. Eventually you get on Talent Manager and there's a few more there, but start on Facebook, and that's all you need is Facebook and a TV CV, and there's a good group online that has a hints, because it looks very different from an academic CV. It needs to be as short as possible, and then send it out and apply and forget. You apply for 5 jobs a day, and one will stick. I promise it does.
The law of large numbers. Thank you very much for your time. And also as well, thank you for not to be honest, not dismissing the opportunity to talk to me, in so much as I know that initially I might have sounded very cynical and a bit angry, but that's only because
we're an angry bunch.
Well, that's the thing. I was a bit
very
cynical
angry bunch. And it is a running joke. Well, we've come up with a new word on digging. It's semantics, which is Sam with semantics, because it's all semantic. Like, you can't say that, but you can say that. We get very angry about a lot of things, and it's easy to get angry, but let's just do something about it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's far better just to have a chat. Thank you. As I say, if anyone wants to comment below, please do. If there's anything particularly interesting, I'll pass them on to Sam. She can answer you if you require an answer. Also, as well,
and if you do want to do Digging for Britain, do send me your projects.
Oh, there you go.
We are looking for Series 11.
And links to your Twitter will be below as well, so people will be able to follow you on Twitter. Sam, again, thank you so much. Thank you guys for watching at home. Hopefully this has been interesting, and it will go out before January because I'm wearing a Santa hat. It has to.
Oh yeah, it has to. Oh, that's true. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Pretend that I'm not there though.
No, it's fine. Bye guys. Cheers.
All right.
Consider supporting Archaeosoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in the video description. Thank you.
Works it out. We've got ours here. There was a sacrifice to the god.